talk about St. Thomas in India.
Yes, sir.
When we talk about Thomas in India, we're talking about the Apostle Thomas in the
Yeah.
Bible,
Right.
one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. According to the early church fathers, he went to India. And there are actually 12 sites in India
Yes, sir.
that he is believed to have visited. You have the 7 churches of St. Thomas in Kerala. Then they have these, they call them half churches. And there's 2 martyrdom sites in Tamil Nadu. So these sites are Kadungalore, Kalayur, Kalibor, and Kokomandala. And I visited those 4 sites, and I visited an additional site called Malayatur. Malayatur is not considered one of the 7 churches. It's a lesser church. They call it a half church. And there's also Ruthim Kodi. I think that's in Tamil Nadu, but it's closer to me. It's on the border between Tamil Nadu and Kerala, southern India. And you also have Aravathura. These are 10 sites. So in a sense, I went to, while I was over there, I went to half of these 10 sites in the region of Kerala. But in Tamil Nadu, the neighboring state or province, there's St. Thomas Mount, and San Thome Basilica. This is where he resided and was martyred, and San Thome Basilica is traditionally where he was buried.
Right.
Now his body was taken to Edessa in ancient times, and then after the fall of Edessa to the Muslims, it was smuggled out. And it was 1950s, I think it was 1952, where the Catholic Church returned a portion of the bones of St. Thomas to the Indian Christians. I was able to go into the church at Mazuris, or Kadungalore, and see the bone of St. Thomas the
Yes, sir.
Apostle. So let's look at this. Pilgrimage is considered one of the traditional spiritual disciplines. There's different traditional disciplines: meditation, scripture reading, they call it like tiva, devotional reading of the Bible.
Yes, sir.
But pilgrimage is a important. It goes way back. The Canterbury Tales, as they're going on a pilgrimage to the site, and they're telling stories as they go along there. But even in the Bible, there are 3 pilgrimage feasts. Right? You had Passover, you had Pentecost, and you had Tabernacles,
Yes, sir.
where they were supposed to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
Yes, sir.
And there's evidence that, I mean, even Elijah the prophet made pilgrimage to Mount Sinai, where he communed with God. And the Catholic Church has this tradition that you actually, I guess, gain an indulgence. That's what you want to call it. There's like a blessing that you gain by doing a pilgrimage.
Yes, sir.
But I think that like going to the Holy Land, I mean, seeing the places where Jesus lived,
Yes, sir.
going to Jerusalem, going down the Via Dolorosa, going to the Jordan River and being baptized, I think that even Protestants would recognize that there's a value in connecting to the Bible story by being in the place where it happened. And of course, you got a lot of pilgrimage tours to the Holy Land or visiting the 7 churches of Asia. I was kind of able to visit one in Berlin because they took Pergamum and put it in Berlin Museum, the new museum in Berlin. So I was able to see a lot of relics from that one of those 7 churches. But you can do a pilgrimage tour to Turkey and see the 7 churches of the Book of Revelation. So even though Protestants aren't heavy into pilgrimage like the Catholics and Orthodox are, they recognize value in pilgrimage to the Holy Land or to the churches of so-called churches of Asia, the 7 churches of the Book of Revelation, or going to the places where Paul went in his ministry. So I think it's recognized that there's a benefit to pilgrimage, even in the Protestant tradition. In southern India, there are several places associated with the Apostle Thomas's visit to India. Perhaps pilgrimage to India to visit places associated with the Apostle Thomas in India can help forge connections between Western and Eastern Christians. Like I mentioned, I went to Kerala, India, and I spoke with the local Christians. I met with the so-called Nestorian Church. This is the Assyrian Church of the East. And I met with Mar Opram, formerly George Mopum. Very good man, very helpful to me. I appreciate him very much. So I had to, and there's Father Michael, who's kind of my guide, and I appreciate his help. And so what we did is these 5 sites are kind of, they're close to each other. I want to mention them really quick. So let's look what I did. Now, there are a lot of tradition. I think they have oral traditions and traditional songs about the story of St. Thomas. Most of these stories are derived from an ancient apocryphal Acts of the Apostles called the Acts of Thomas.
Yes, sir.
And the Acts of Thomas is the story of Thomas being sent by Jesus himself to go to India.
Yes, sir.
Now, the earlier accounts were, not just references by the church fathers. So the Acts of Thomas is dated sometime between like 180 to 220. So Eusebius wrote his History of the Church in 324, and so those traditions of Thomas and India have already been established.
Yes,
There are some traditions of Bartholomew also going to India. Sometimes some people think that perhaps in Aramaic you say Marthoma. Some people think what sounds like Bartholomew. Maybe they got maybe Westerners got confused. Maybe both of them went because the apostles usually worked in groups of 2. Anyway, but according to the Acts of Thomas, it mentions Thomas going to India through Parthia. And I was thinking about this today, and I think Papias of Hierapolis.
Yes, sir.
We only have fragments of the book he wrote, and what Papias wrote was recollections of people who knew. He interviewed like the surviving apostles, and there weren't many alive at his time, and people who had known the apostles. And he mentions Thomas. So I remember when I was in Syria, there's a gate in Damascus called Bab Tuma, which means the gate of Thomas. And apparently the tradition is that Thomas stood at that gate and preached.
Yes.
And Thomas is also associated with the city of Edessa, where he was buried. There might have been a reason why his body was brought to Edessa. That's because he sent Thaddeus to Edessa, and apparently I think there's a strong case that Thomas himself went to Edessa and then he traveled on from there to India. And that's why, I guess, when news of his martyrdom arrived, they retrieved his body
Yes.
and brought it to Edessa, where it was for many years. The Pilgrim Aguria, writing around the year 380, she mentions visiting the tomb of Thomas in Edessa, but by that time it's established that Thomas had gone to India. So he went through Parthia and he visited Parthian kingdoms in India. And then we have these very strong traditions that Thomas went to South India and he founded these 12, well, he went to all these locations. I mean, he's buried at San Tome Basilica.
Yes.
So, I want to do a video series, and I got a lot of footage of these places where I went.
Yes.
So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an episode on each of these 12 sites, and I hope to go back to India
Yes.
and visit the remaining sites that I have not yet gone to. I didn't have time. I think I had like a week, well, just a week and a half in India. I had to come back, so we're only able to visit 5 of the 10 sites in Kerala. But like I said, there's 2 more in Tamil Nadu. And one of the half churches is actually it's on the border between Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So we do have a lot of folklore and tradition, which is interesting. They had this big billboard in, where was it? I guess Kokamangalam, and had a lot of paintings on it, traditions, the oral traditions of Thomas. And I haven't really been able to get I had somebody's like, could you translate this to me? Because these are stories I'm not familiar with,
Yes.
because they're not, I've read the Gospel. I mean, I've read the Gospel of Thomas and the Acts of Thomas. So that's something I want to mention really quick, is there's a lot of literature associated with Thomas. You have an infancy Gospel of Thomas, you have the Gospel of Thomas, you have the Acts of Thomas, Psalms of Thomas, and an Apocalypse of Thomas. So that's 5 books attributed to the Apostle Thomas. And Bible scholars think that these probably originated in Syria, probably around Edessa, because you have this veneration of Thomas there, and that's probably because he evangelized it,
Yes.
right? And he was buried there.
Why?
And like, I think there's a reason why somebody from Edessa went to India, a merchant, and brought his body back to be buried in Edessa. So the first place I went to, Kadungalore, it's called Muzeris, and it's a port town, and many nationalities, Greeks, Jews, Romans, and Persians traded with India there. And that's something that's very important, is when we hear these stories about St. Thomas, and there's a lot of fantastical elements to the Acts of Thomas. People read it, and some of it sounds very interesting and compelling, but some of it seems far-fetched.
Yes.
So it's kind of easy just to dismiss the whole thing. And until lately, people thought, well, I mean, India? That's far away. I mean, how could a Jewish person get to India? But there were ties between the Roman world and India. There were Roman ports. Apparently there was a detachment of Roman soldiers in Kerala.
Yes.
They found Roman coins, a little fortress there, probably a trading port for Romans. You have this book called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. It's a Greek sailing manual about how to use the monsoon winds to get from the Middle East and the Greco-Roman world to India and back. And there's a lot of important things, spices and other things from India that was in high demand in Rome. Probably exotic wildlife. This is really sad, it's cruel, but there's that movie Gladiator, and it showed, one of the scenes showed the gladiator fighting a tiger, like a Bengal tiger. And they would do that. They would bring, it's kind of sick, but they would bring, to me, very cruel, but they bring wildlife around the world to slaughter them, you know, to the for the entertainment of the people of Colosseum in the arena. We were talking about it this morning. It's kind of interesting conversation. It's like if you look at the Roman people, there's a lot of things to be admired in the Romans. You know, our republican system, of course, the Caesars destroyed that, but Rome began as a republic.
Right.
It's a constitutional system,
I know.
and they Julius Caesar and his allies destroyed that. What Augustus Caesar he was a very competent ruler, but he realized that he wanted to create a dictatorship, and he succeeded in that. But he realized it's like these people are devoted, or enough Romans, you know, are devoted to the idea of, you know, a democracy, a republic. So what he did was, you know, he allowed them to have a senate and elections and stuff like that, but real power resided with them. So he had this illusion or a facade of a republic, but he'd taken the power away from the people and destroyed the republic, the republican system. But it served as inspiration later to our country. But then, like we see in the Colosseum, crucifixions, cruelty to the Jews, the Carthaginians, the Germanic people. There's something very evil and twisted about the Romans as well. Great engineers, great artisans, but something very perverse. And you see it in Pompeii. I mean, it's just, you can't, I mean, it's an important archaeological site, but if they have a display, they have to mark it off and say, this is obscene. You know, you don't want children to see how depraved these people were. And I think they found some graffiti that a Christian put in Pompeii saying, you know, this city is Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was destroyed the way Sodom and Gomorrah was.
Right.
So Kundungalore, that's the first place, these pilgrimage sites I went to, it's called Muziris in ancient times. That's something that's very confusing for me when I'm trying to get this information together about the 7 churches of India and the so-called half churches and the shrines, the martyrdom sites in Tamil Nadu. There's a national pastime in India. They play cricket, but they also like to change the names of everything all the time. It's crazy. Like, you know, you have Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I think they changed the name of Calcutta. And I think that it's like, well, these are names of places that are imposed upon us by, you know, our British colonizers. But, you know, people don't call it Calcutta. You know, it's not in anybody's mind that that's a way to ridicule or demean the Indian people. It's just the name of a town.
Right.
And it's well known. And then they change everything. It's like, where am I? And then these words are, especially in Kerala. The people in Kerala are Dravidian. What's a Dravidian? Well, these are probably the indigenous people of India. And what had happened is Aryan tribes, Aryan, doesn't mean what Adolf Hitler said. It means just they're a nomadic people, probably a warrior people in ancient times, probably in this prehistoric era. And one of these Aryan tribes invaded northern India. And their language, Sanskrit, is actually closely related to Greek and Latin. So these people are related to Europeans, actually. So the Indo-Europeans that came from the north and subjugated India, but in the south, the indigenous Indians are called Dravidians. And their language isn't related to European languages at all. Like the Semitic languages are not related to European languages at all. Like with English and Spanish, there's a lot of words that are the same in both languages, or they're similar enough to make it out. Right? Or French. French had a big influence on English. Even the Russian language is distantly related to English. They're all Indo-European languages. Iranian, Persian, or Farsi is an Indo-European language. But the Dravidian languages of southern India are totally different. And so the names of these churches are you know, kind of hard for me to pronounce. So I had to go through this. I want to put them in a more logical order. Kundungalore, Pali, Parvur, Tukamangalam, Niranath, Milikov, Pilon, or Poland, and then the Ruth Am Cody, Malayatul, Erebathura, and St. Thomas Mount, St. Thomas Missouri. So, Luzaris is in port, and right at the port now they have this church dedicated to St. Thomas. This is the place where he disembarked. I think it used to be called Kranganor, and a long time ago now it's Kandungalore.
All right, Father Michael, what church are we at right now?
We are in Kodungalur. It was known as Muzaris.
Luzaris. What happened here at this church?
It is believed that St. Thomas came in India AD 52 in Muzaris. It is actually it is a lake or a river which is falling to the sea, and it was a big port in first century AD.
So this is where St. Thomas's boat came in and
Yeah.
he disembarked to bring the gospel to India.
Yeah.
So this is the first church
that
that
was-
St. Thomas founded. So what's happening in this bas relief here, this depiction?
This picture is just St. Thomas came in Kodungalur and local people. They are
So these are the local people,
yeah, these are the local people.
and this is Thomas, and Thomas is preaching to them.
Yeah, we should present a pic of that.
And this is the port. Here's the
That is a lake. This you can see the boat and the lake is behind.
So this is the first of the 7 churches that was founded by the Apostle Thomas
Yes.
here in India.
Yeah.
And this is where Christianity in India begins.
First, St. Thomas came in 52 AD.
52 AD, beginning of Indian Christianity.